go get it. I'm like, oh no, we don't
Really
deal with that.
brightens my day to see what I'm up against.
We don't do,
Yeah,
not,
we don't have it so much here, but
No.
That's why I told you you had more, because I paid.
Guys don't look good.
It's not a good
Public
thing.
Works isn't much better.
Yeah, kind of. You're in the grass and stuff. You look like a golfer.
Try.
How about?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It actually matched mine almost exactly. Okay, we're all good. It's just that something was wrong with my newsstand.
Yeah, no, I remember. Wasn't there.
Yeah.
No, so it's not before you know. I guess I became the other stuff. I need, and I'm in.
of a new dessert they have out. So they reserved all our reservations for all of our food.
We are close. Thanks for the water.
What's that?
This pen is just crap.
This? I don't know. I've always seen it.
It's a court
Court schedule?
something.
Oh.
It's a court thing.
Gosh, I don't have a good pen. Is this one right?
I reserved it for
We-
the downstairs meeting.
Me too. Me too.
I want you to know that.
Yeah, so Bob, Mike Pusey's sister died. I don't know
Yeah,
if you heard that.
Michelle.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
talking to Matt, we just need to finish that conversation about how the city wants to approach it.
Yeah.
But, okay, we are on. Okay, you ready? I'd like to welcome everybody out to the Roy City Council meeting for May 21st, 2024. The time is now 5:30. Want to recognize and welcome, we have Councilmember Saxton, Councilmember Scadden, Councilmember Sophie Paul, Councilmember Jackson, and Councilmember Joe Paul. It's great to have all of the council member here tonight. We've asked Sophie Paul if she would go ahead and lead us in a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance. Sophie?
Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. Please join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, we got public comment period. If you have anything you'd like to talk about, please step up. I will just indicate to you on our public comment periods, we're going to limit the conversation to 4 minutes. So if you would like to say something, any topic, please step up to the mic. Kevin, we need your name and address. And Brittany, would you start the clock?
He's never been a 4-minute talker.
All right. My name is Kevin Homer. I live at 5398 South, 4000 West here in Roy. I do want to talk a little bit about the discussion item, presentation number 1, where the organization is proposing a change to the way that we do voting here, not only in the city, but in the state. I'm kind of the definition of an old dog. I do like to at least pretend or think that I can be taught new tricks. So despite having used plurality voting, majority voting, for 200 years here in the Republic, I'm willing to, I think it's good to have a discussion. Should we continue with plurality voting, go to ranked choice voting, go to approval voting, which we're going to be talking about tonight? I would ask each of you to very seriously consider this presentation and the discussion about changing voting. Plurality of vote has been done for 240 years and it's worked pretty well. But just because my dad did it and my grandpa did it doesn't mean we should just keep doing it that way. Let's talk about it. There was some information that was supposed to be in the data packet today that we did not get. There were 3 cities, Huntsville, North Ogden, and Provo, that have created letters by their city council in support of this. Supposedly the clerks of the 29 counties here in Utah also have expressed some support of this as an alternative way of voting. Okay, we did not receive those emails, even though it seems that's very public information and we should be able to have access to it. I think we should have access to it so that we can discuss why this proposal to change the way that we vote is being done. I do think it's very interesting if we were to, one thing I would like to see is let's go and actually have a focus group created, 100 people, whatever, however many people we want. If, I don't know if Mr. Allen is here right now, but I would really, you want me to twirl?
He's around.
Oh, okay. I would really like to see some kind of focus group where we could compare if we gave them the same list of candidates and have them vote according to plurality voting and the same list of candidates, and have it go through approval voting and the same list and go through ranked choice voting. I would really like to see what the results would be given the same people would try to vote within each one of the systems. So
Interesting
let's have a
idea.
discussion and let's be very, very clear, you know, that what we're doing is trying to change the way that we vote. I know, as much as I admire James Madison, author of the Constitution, even after it was approved in 1787 and amended in 1791, he still supported looking into different ways of voting. So given that I respect him a whole bunch, I understand even he wanted to make sure that we, you know, got as good a government as we could. In the last couple of minutes, or a few seconds, I know YCC is going to be here giving a presentation also. I really like YCC. I do try to donate what I can to the group. Very good cause. It might be worth having the city look at giving them some more support. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Okay, anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the presentations. First one we're going to have, and Nate, that's you? Okay, vote approval voting. Are there charts associated with this?
I have a presentation that I can.
You have a
put up on the screen.
presentation there?
I
Okay.
can send some supporting
May I
info.
suggest maybe if we can, to that which you can release, it'd be kind of nice if we can maybe get a hard copy of that, if you can direct it to Matt or Brittany sometime later so that we can kind of go through it as well.
Yeah,
Hopefully we'll keep notes. Go ahead, Nate.
Will do. Well, yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for having me here today. And I appreciate the public comment. I do think that voting is something we should take very seriously. And, you know, it's a cornerstone of our democracy, and it's our goal in a voting method to best represent the people who are voting. And that's what my presentation is about today. I do want to start kind of with the ask. We're not here today to ask Roy to switch over to approval voting right now. We are currently in discussion with the legislature about offering it as an option to cities. And so that's what we're doing. We're just going to city council meetings, giving this presentation about this method so you can be informed on it. And if it's something that you might be interested in seeing provided as an option, then that's what that letter would basically just request to the legislature as we continue that discussion over the interim session and the general session next year. So
Nate, hold on just a second. Mark, can you hear him? Okay, you're okay? I just want to make sure that
This
the
closer as
mic's
well.
up. Thanks.
Okay. So at this point, you're probably wondering what is approval voting. So simply put, approval voting lets you vote yes or no for each candidate rather than saying yes to only one candidate. The candidate with the most yes votes wins, or in other words, the highest approval rating. So you can see an example of what the ballot would look like on the right here. Essentially, the only change to the ballot is to that instruction line from vote for one candidate to mark all names you approve of. So how is this different than our current plurality voting system? Well, our current system elects based on exclusive support. So basically you have to have a very passionate base, but what that means is it's usually the largest single slice of the population, which doesn't guarantee a majority. Oftentimes we'll see people win with 40% of the vote, 30% of the vote in some cases, and the more candidates you add to a race, the lower that winning percentage is. Approval voting elects based on favorability rating. So favorability is basically those polls that we take before every election. Oftentimes we see them in presidential elections. Basically just asked how many of you people like each of these candidates, and whoever has that highest favorability rating would win the race in approval voting. So basically what this guarantees is candidates with broad-based appeal. So candidates that appeal to multiple slices of the population rather than the largest single slice, which means that they're ultimately more representative of the entire population rather than just that one largest single slice, as I've mentioned. Again, plurality voting favors those candidates with that single passionate base of support. And that's not to say that that same candidate wouldn't win under approval voting. It just means that they have to appeal to more slices of the population rather than that one single passionate base. Our current system works really well when you only have 2 candidates in the race, which makes a lot of sense. You just ask people, which one of these 2 candidates do you like the most, and they pick that one person, and they win. And that's why we often see runoff races, or sometimes primaries will narrow down to just 2 candidates. Approval voting works really well with any number of candidates because you're able to give your opinion on each candidate, saying, I like this one or I don't like this one. It works really well with any number of candidates and makes sure that you actually can understand who the most liked person in that race is. So some things I'll be going over today is why approval voting. So I've mentioned this a couple times, but it best reflects the values of the voters, or in other words, is most representative. It produces these broadly supported consensus winners. It limits vote splitting and spoiled elections. Vote splitting is often, you'll see that happen when you have 3 candidates in a race and maybe 2 candidates are very similar and 60% of the population likes both of them. And then that third candidate is only liked by about 40% of the population. What usually happens is those 2 candidates split their vote and each only get 30%. And that candidate who is less liked and only has 40% of the vote wins the election because the vote was split. Approval voting basically eliminates vote splitting, so you don't have that dynamic to worry about anymore. Additionally, it's incredibly cost effective. There can also be some cost savings associated, which I'll go into later, associated with not hosting a primary election. Again, the biggest reason for that is we often narrow down our field in a primary election to avoid vote splitting. Because that's not a problem in approval voting, it can save the city a lot of money. It's secure, transparent, and easily audited. It's simple and easy to administer and explain. And ultimately, it's more expressive than our current system because you can give your opinion on every person on the ballot. So the first thing I want to talk about is voter values and what we call consensus candidates. So you can see on the right here these 2 graphs. The one on the left is a plurality election here in Utah. It's our 2020 gubernatorial primary with Spencer Cox when he won in the Republican primary with 36% of the vote. John Huntsman came in a close second with 35% of the vote. Greg Hughes and Thomas Wright behind them. On the right side, you'll see an approval voting election where Tashara Jones, this was used in St. Louis and is still currently used in St. Louis. Tashara Jones, the winner, had 57% of the vote, or 57% approval. Cara Spencer had 46%, and Lewis Reed had 39%. Something that's worth noting is that all 3 of these candidates had a higher percentage than the winner in the gubernatorial primary here in Utah under plurality voting. The biggest reason that we find this important is because this higher winning percentage does give the winner a stronger mandate to lead. Not only do they have more confidence in themselves that they best represent the population, but voters have more confidence when they see a higher winning percentage. We heard a lot after Spencer Cox won that, he only had 36% support, when in reality, it's still likely that Spencer Cox would have won under an approval voting election. His approval rating is quite high in the state. So it just allows us to see those true levels of support for each candidate. Additionally, not splitting that vote does lead to those broadly supported candidates. As I mentioned, we make sure that the person who actually is most liked across the population, rather than dividing support and just winning that largest single slice, is the winner. Lastly, candidates have a very simple strategy. They just appeal to as many people as possible. So when you're going up to a voter who may not have heard of you and they say they're already going to vote for someone else, you don't have to talk poorly about that candidate, and you don't have to explain to them the voting method. You can just say, you can just vote for me as well if I'm similar to that candidate, and you can support both of us. This graph just basically shows what we call voter satisfaction. That's just a fancy term for how happy is the population after an election. You can see on this matrix, it's voter satisfaction on the bottom and simplicity on the side here. A random winner would be very simple, but not produce a lot of voter satisfaction. On this right side here, these dotted lines, that's the magic best winner if somehow we could pick a candidate that 100% of people would like. Our current system does, it's very simple, but the voter satisfaction is low, and a lot of that is because of vote splitting. It's very simple, and the variation between results isn't too big. Additionally, there's instant runoff voting, or ranked choice voting as it's often called. This can produce winners with higher voting percentages, but it has a large variation. You can see that in certain cases it can perform as poorly as plurality voting in terms of how happy the voters are after the election. Lastly is approval voting. So it's very simple. You could even argue that it's more simple than our current system. The number one reason that ballots get tossed out under plurality voting is because of overvoting. So people think that they want to mark 2 people, then their ballot gets tossed out. That's not a problem with approval voting, but it also consistently produces these results where people are very satisfied with the winning candidate. So the next slide here is on security and administration. So the first bullet point talks about precinct summability. This is not the case with some other alternatives like ranked choice voting. All precinct summability means is that we can still tabulate the votes in the individual locations that they're cast and then just send the totals to a central reporting location. Under other alternatives, you either have to truck ballots into a central location to count them or transmit the raw ballot data electronically, which basically just produces a single weak point for security. And for this reason, because approval voting is precinct summable like our current system already is, the county clerks have stated approval voting is the only alternative that has an audit trail that they are comfortable with. And Ricky Hatch, the Weber County Clerk, is supportive of implementing approval voting if cities would like to try it. Additionally, there are fewer spoiled ballots, as I mentioned, because of overvoting not being an issue, so you make sure that everyone who cast that ballot, their vote is still counted, unless they do something crazy like scribble all over the paper or rip it up and send it in. So the next slide is on cost effectiveness. So like some other alternatives, another big advantage approval voting has is that you don't need new voting machines or software, which is a big expense for the state and for counties. Our current software and our current voting machines already have the ability to tabulate approval voting. That's because it's very similar to the system we already use in city council races where you can mark 2 for 2 people getting elected. It can count when multiple bubbles are already filled in. And so for that reason, all of our systems are already compatible with this voting method. Additionally, ballot size stays the same, so mail-in voting with ranked choice voting is actually quite a bit more expensive because it takes the whole length of the page. It usually doubles or triples the amount of paper that's used. Approval voting, like I said earlier, the only change is to the instruction line. So it looks exactly the same as what voters are already used to. You can still split the column and have one race on the left and one race on the right, which saves the county quite a bit of money compared to some other alternatives, and also printing costs for that reason. Voter education is also extremely cost efficient and simple. So candidates don't need to explain the method to people when they're running. This was a big complaint that we saw with ranked choice voting across the state, is that they felt like they were spending too much time to explaining to the voters how to use the method rather than talking about the issues that they were running on. Because approval voting is so simple, you can just mark multiple candidates. You don't have to spend as much time doing that as a candidate. Additionally, as I mentioned, it is more cost effective. So you can see on the right here, these estimates are based on other cities that have used ranked choice voting or that have used approval voting. Voter education for ranked choice and Roy, and this is based on population in Roy, would be about $25,000, and under approval voting would be about $8,400. So about a third of the cost. It's much more easy to educate, as we've seen in some other cities that have used both of these. Additionally, I mentioned the elimination of a primary earlier. You can see Roy City spent about $37,000, $38,000 on a primary because you are able to eliminate the primary under approval voting because of that elimination of vote splitting. That's a potential large cost savings for the city. And then this last bullet point here in the graph underneath it, just talk about the additional costs for administration for other methods like ranked choice voting. This was a graph that we obtained from the county clerks across the state. Basically, this just shows in an individual county, the number of participating municipalities changes that cost. If there's only one in a county, it would be $36,000 for that one city to pay. That cost does go down as more cities opt in, but it was a big thing for the first city to jump in on the ranked choice voting pilot program. This graph is completely irrelevant under approval voting. We've talked to the county clerks and there would be no additional costs such as this for cities or for the county, again, because we don't need to increase the cost of mail-in balloting, and the cost for voting machines and software is not there as well. So lastly, where has approval voting been used? It has been used for a long time internationally. The Papal conclaves to elect a pope uses this method. It's been used in Venice, Italy. The Greek legislature has used it previously, and we still use it to elect the UN General Secretary. And then in the US, the first place to implement it was Fargo, North Dakota, and then St. Louis, Missouri followed that. And I personally started this organization here in Utah, being a Utah resident, because I found this voting method and thought it was a really good way to get better reflection of voter values. And so Utah's possibly next in line for this. And this graph on the right is some exit polling used from St. Louis just to show how people felt about the method after they used it. Instructions were clear. They felt it was easily understood and easy to use. They felt comfortable with it. They liked the increased expressivity. They liked it, wanted to expand its use. They thought it could increase turnout. And they felt overall the election was more positive. You might see that that election was more positive, was only about 49%, but people who felt like that was neutral was an additional 36%, so no more than a quarter of people said no on any of these questions. So just a summary here, comparing our current system, approval voting and ranked choice voting. The cost is the lowest between those three. You produce the highest winning percentage. Voter satisfaction is significantly increased compared to these other two systems. Ballot spoilage is the lowest. We don't need new voting software or machines. The ballot size stays small. County complexity is low. It's precinct summable, and voter education is moderate because it is a change from the current system that we have, but not as much as ranked choice voting. And I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay. Go ahead. Questions? Joe?
So I have a question on this. So like you take our regular ballot where there's 5 people, 6 people on it, and you can choose up to 2 or up to 3. If somebody only chooses one person on our current system and one person on your system, what's the difference?
So essentially, there is no difference. If you only support one candidate, you're still completely capable to do that. Basically, you're just drawing your line. That's where the expressivity of this method comes in, is you draw your line between where your yes and your no is. So if you feel like only one candidate deserves your support, then you can still do that.
Other comments? Nate, let me ask you, ranked choice voting has been used and is being used in the state of Utah.
Yeah.
Can I make the assumption from your comment that, and I haven't read the legislators' position on that, but did the legislation approve that particular type of voting, and that's the reason why the cities are authorized to do that if they choose to want that path?
That's correct. So there's a legislative pilot program that's been created that just allows cities to opt in to use it if they want. They still have to get permission from their county clerk because most cities contract with their county. But essentially what we're trying to do is a similar thing where it would just be another pilot program with approval voting to test it out.
Okay. So your position would be is that if they can allow the ranked choice voting to occur, let's set up another pilot with this particular one to see how it flushes out.
That's correct. And like I've said, we've seen some issues with ranked choice voting. It trended up to 23 cities in their second year. It's down to 12 and likely to be less. It almost was repealed this last session, so it doesn't seem like that pilot program is going particularly well. But we still think that the state deserves a solution to vote splitting issues and producing those highest majority winners.
Okay. And then I guess what you would like the city council to consider would be is to at least draft up a letter and forward it to the legislators indicating you would like at least be considered. Is that kind of the framework of what you're?
Yeah, that's correct. So other cities have just wrote a letter that essentially just says we would like to see this offered as an option. It doesn't opt you in any kind of way, and if that is offered as an option, we'd love to come back and talk about what implementation would look like in Roy.
Okay. Okay, council, thoughts, comments? Let me just share at least a thought along this line. It was certainly discussed in previous times, I would say, over the last few years, whether or not, excuse me, whether or not Roy City should venture off and use a ranked choice voting approach. And we talked about the challenges Roy City would have doing that in large part because we depend so heavily on the county. County handles our voting. If we stretched out on a new program, we would then have to assume responsibility to make sure it's certifiable and pay for whatever the resources of that. Certainly, I think to Nate's point and those prototypes that are occurring right now with ranked choice voting, if those were funded, where you had a group of cities together where you can basically justify the cost, that may be one thing. Our premise has been in the past, in essence, where the county goes, so goes Roy City. And if county basically makes the shift, then certainly we could find the value in just following whatever the county did, because we're going to pay somebody, and we found that we thought it would be cheaper just to pay the county to continue our voting programs. I think to Nate's point, he just simply says, hey, we think this is a viable tool. And he's just saying is if you agree with that, then he says we should probably just line up with some other cities and send to the legislators notification. Roy City would be willing to at least consider this type of a voting mechanism if the legislators would then approve it to allow it to happen. And so that's the request that I think, Nate, you bring to the table tonight.
Very well put.
Okay?
Would we have to have approval of the county first in order to send that letter in, or I mean?
From a
yeah.
cost perspective, I would say yes. And that's, I think, honestly, what's the most intriguing thing to me is it cuts our administrative cost by 2/3. But it has to be adopted in mass across the entire county. Because again, it was a stepped down cost increase the more cities that signed on, correct?
And that is correct with ranked choice voting. With approval voting, there is no additional cost, though.
No additional cost. So the administrative costs that we're paying now would stay fixed. So it,
Yeah, that's correct, other than eliminating that primary, if that's something that you
so
choose to
yeah,
do.
so we'd lose the
And-
expense of an additional
Of a
pri-
primary.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
potential
and
primary.
also add, we've spoken with Ricky Hatch, and he said he would be willing to implement approval voting for an individual city or certain amount of cities rather than the whole county, if that's something that only a few cities wanted to do in the county.
Well, I think it warrants council further conversation. Is there a source by which we can read, find more information?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're a contact point if we got some details, but
Yeah,
is there
absolutely.
something out there that we can basically tap into? Because I think for us to carry this to the next step, if you choose to want to basically sign on to a letter to the legislators, then there may be more questions and more information needed here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can send over some additional information as well as the presentation, and then our website has some more information. It's just utahapproves.org, and I'll send this along as well. But there's another website called the Center for Election Science that has more in-depth resources on the comparison between voting methods that I would encourage you to look into.
Okay, Nate.
So we obviously have 2 years to think about this for our next election.
Yeah, but I can't help to think the
Eventually, you have a
legislators are
primary
probably
year.
working
Yeah, the primary,
some
that's why I
things.
was wondering how far you'd have to know in advance that we decided to do it.
So we are talking to the Interim Government Operations Committee this year about studying approval voting, and the more letters that we get, the more interested they might become in that. And so that's our goal right now, is over the next few months to get a handful of letters to be able to show them that there is support across the state. And then the hope is that either in this next general session or the one following that, that there may be a pilot project created before the next municipal elections.
Okay, if it's okay with you, council, Nate, if you can share the information, get it to Matt so that we can consolidate it. We'll get it out to the council. If you have other questions, you can direct them to Nate or see what the website might provide. And then I'll come back as an action item and ask if you want to go ahead and continue, okay, to consider framing a letter to send to the legislators in terms of Roy City's willingness to consider it. You okay with that? Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Hey,
thank you, Council and Mayor.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, please send your information if you can. That'd be great.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, Margaret, welcome, YCC.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, for the opportunity to talk with you tonight. I think most of you probably are fairly familiar with YCC, but if not, hopefully, this computer. Hopefully it'll give you just a little introduction. So I'm Margaret Rose. I'm the Executive Director at YCC, Family Crisis Center. We're centered in Ogden, but we serve all of Weber and Morgan counties with our services. So we provide support for victims of domestic and sexual violence, and we do that through advocacy, resources, support, shelter, safety, and so on, in hopes that we can get people back on or on a safe and healthy track in their life. And as I go through this, some of the information I'll share tonight about our county crimes, some of the circumstances we deal with might be fairly challenging for some folks. And so I just want to give you a heads up that, if it might be some sensitive information. So if we take a snapshot of what is happening in our county, kind of over the last 5 years, these data come from SIAC, the statewide information Analysis Center, I believe. And these are the violent crimes in Weber County over the last few years. Aggravated assault, fondling, rape, robbery, sexual assault with an object, and sodomy. YCC responds and supports the victims of all of these crimes, with the exception of robbery directly, but many times victims experiencing some of these other crimes also experience robbery. So it's a bit of a crossover there. So we, our primary goal, our primary mission is to support victims. We don't do any services for perpetrators of violent crimes. Last July, the legislature approved or passed into statute that all law enforcement agencies were supposed to use, are required to use, the lethality assessment program. This is a tool designed for law enforcement. It's been in place for many years, and I will commend Roy City and Chief Gwynn for being early adopters of using this tool. It reduces assaults, it reduces homicides related to domestic violence, and it ensures that, well, it helps ensure that victims are connected with services that can help support them. And so it's a quantitative tool, if you will. It's a questionnaire. And so it takes kind of the subjectiveness out of the response for law enforcement. If they're responding to a domestic violence call, which we know are some of the most dangerous calls that our law enforcement partners go out on, it kind of removes some of the subjectiveness of those calls for them as to whether, does this person need to access services? Do they need to go into shelter? Are they okay on their own? You know, it's like if you answer a couple of these questions affirmatively, it will be an automatic, yes, we're going to connect you to services. And so that's what the legislature passed into requirement last July. So starting in, really at the end of the session in May and June, many of our law enforcement partners around the state who hadn't been using the LAP really began using it. And I think law enforcement agencies that were using it really tried to start using it more with a little more fidelity. And so we saw in May and June, there were 1,882 laps that took place statewide. And in July, when it became law, there were 1,166 laps. In the prior year, in the entire year, there were only 4,500 laps administered in the state. And so you can see, once it became required, I mean, the rate just went through the roof. We did not have an explosion of domestic violence in the state. We had an explosion of people getting connected to services, which is really, really important. These are August data, and what we see with May, June, July, and August is really the same profile, and that is about 2/3 of the respondents were deemed at high risk for lethality. They were deemed at high risk of being killed by their abuser. Those data have stayed consistent month after month after month. I'm not going to bore you with a pie chart for every month between last July and now, but they've stayed relatively the same, 62, 63, 66%. Just to kind of give you an idea of what victims are telling us and what they're reporting through the LAP process is that they were, and these are actual numbers statewide, 243 victims said that they were threatened with a weapon, that they had been told that they were threatened that they were going to be killed or their children were going to be killed. Pets also are a big I guess, leverage that people it's used against them, then I'm going to kill the dog if you don't, if you leave me or, whatever it might be, don't comply. 337 people actually believe their aggressor would kill them. 428 people, 37%, said their aggressor had tried to choke them. And that is a big variable, and we'll get to that in just a second. And then 384 said the aggressor had a gun or could easily get one. And that's also obviously a pretty significant variable when it comes to lethality. So strangulation is actually getting a lot of notoriety, press, increase in understanding that it is a very, very strong indicator of lethality. If someone has been strangled, even to the point where the researchers will say, if a person puts their hands on your neck, they have just told you that they will kill you. It's oftentimes not a visible indicator, but we know from the medical community and research, and now we have some long-term data, we know that there are really significant long-term impacts from strangulation. So, and you can see there that the odds for homicide increased 750% for those victims who've been previously strangled. So that's one of the affirmative questions on the LAP, and it pretty much is an automatic entree into our shelter services. So to give you an idea, YCC covers our area in Weber County, of course, and we served about almost 2,200 individuals residing in the Ogden area, and then almost that many throughout the rest of Weber and Morgan counties. In addition, if you take Ogden out of the equation, the top 3 cities for clients coming to us, victims coming to us, and referrals is Roy. We had 289 individuals seeking services, followed by West Haven and North Ogden. Now, there's a caveat to this, and that is that we do not require people coming into shelter to disclose where they were living or show proof of address or anything like that. First of all, a lot of times they're coming there with no personal documents whatsoever. They're just arriving with nothing. They haven't had time to get their purse, their personal documents have been kept. They've been destroyed, a number of things. So there's enough information that we request from clients without sort of grilling them on where are you living, who are you staying with, all that kind of stuff. So we don't. So if you look at the graph, we have that breakdown of the cities is based on the information that we have from clients that we have collected. We have over 10,000 services that we provided last year, 10,000 separate individuals who've accessed services, and we don't have a known address for them. So I'm not a statistician, but I think it's probably fairly fair to say that they probably fall out somewhere in that similar representation of what we see here. And actually, this one is a little more descriptive. So you can see that Roy, back to that 279 number, that's, again, excluding Ogden, that's sort of the breakout of where the clients are coming from in the city, and not including the 10,000 people. So the LAPs by police department, kind of following those the LAPs are the lethality assessments, the referrals. Again, Ogden, of course, and then followed by Weber County, the whole Weber County and Roy. Statewide, after July 1st, we've seen an 86% increase in referrals to our community-based organizations. So There are 15 domestic violence and sexual assault service providers statewide. We work really, really closely together. We have a very strong network together, but we're all independent nonprofit organizations. So we are about 60, our organization is about 60% funded with federal and state dollars, and then we have to raise the other 40% of our funding. And so you can imagine that an 86% increase in demand for services has taxed all of our organizations pretty dramatically, honestly. So I think the silver lining to this, if there is such a thing, is that of those victims who are referred, we see 70% of them engaging with services, which is hugely successful, I think. And at YCC, we've seen 74% of our clients engaging with services once they've been referred. And most of them have never accessed services before. So our law enforcement partners are doing a great job getting people referred, and we're doing a good job getting them connected and into services and helping them get to a healthier, safer life. That reduces assaults, that reduces homicide, it reduces the adverse childhood effects that their kids are experiencing. So if there's a silver lining here, I think that's certainly it. Just to kind of give you a snapshot, again, these are pre-LAP stats, but just to kind of give you a snapshot of what we see at YCC on an annual basis. We generally see somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 crisis calls a year. During COVID, we went well over 10,000. It was just crazy. Our advocates would pick it up and have a call and put it down, and it would just ring nonstop. So pretty dramatic. We generally hover right around 12,000 shelter nights a year of safety and security. We have a 61-bed shelter. We have education classes, domestic violence classes, support groups. We have free therapy for clients. We help with childcare, transportation, and housing. So wraparound services, protective orders, meals, really everything that you can imagine to help a person get safe and to stay safe. I think one of the reasons that I'm here tonight is to ask for a partnership with all of the cities. I've spoken to the Chiefs group, the Mayor's group, the WACOG group, and I'm making my way to the city councils. Nate and I are on the same schedule. We were both at South Ogden last couple of weeks ago, so I'm in Riverdale next week, Nate, if he's still here. So just trying to develop a stronger partnership with the cities. We're providing services to all of the residents in the cities, and we need some help in order to be able to do that. I think what you can expect from us, and some of these we're already, all of these we're already doing, but the LAP training for officers, working really closely with law enforcement on the training. We have really 2 LAP coordinators at our office. We have the support for victims through that whole process. We have 24/7 response, including on-scene response as long as it's safe. Our staff will also do the strangulation exams to make sure if people need to go to medical, to get medical care, that they're assured that can happen. We'll take them there if needed. We have protective order assistance that we do, and of course shelter and support and all the wraparound services. So through research we know, and we also know just anecdotally, we know that we can reduce the number of those repeat calls that law enforcement experiences. I think Chief Gwynn can speak to this better than I can, but I think probably responding to some of the same households multiple times, and if we can get victims connected to services, those don't escalate, they de-escalate. and we can reduce the number of those repeat responses and the number of assaults and homicides. So we know those are really dangerous times for victims and for law enforcement, or those times when people are leaving, and the couple of weeks afterward are the most dangerous times for them. So anyway, as we've talked about trying to figure out like what we need in order to really increase our services, our staffing, and just cover our expenses, our goal is to add $150,000 to our budget annually. And I think the strongest way to do this has been through kind of a police services agreement. That's the way we framed it with Ogden City, and it's worked really well. It's not necessarily a donation from the city, it's more of a contract or an agreement. And the way I broke it out was by population. We're asking cities to enter into agreements with YCC and help offset some of these expenses and these costs that we're providing. I think most of the cities, well, I know all of the cities, not one have resources for victims beyond our law enforcement partners and maybe some system-based advocates. So we're covering a huge geographic area and a huge population base, and we need support from the cities to help be able to continue to do that, especially at the level that we are now. Royce City makes up 14.39% of the population, and that percentage of funding would be around 21.5 is what we're requesting. And then we're adding an additional ask from the county itself to also help offset some of those expenses. So I think between all of us, between law enforcement, between city, between YCC, I think we can really, together, we can develop kind of a network and an infrastructure that's really supportive for victims of these crimes. So I'm happy to entertain questions or comments.
Council, you have any questions for Margaret?
One question I have is, it seems like there's a large number of individuals that use your service that you don't know where they come from.
That's correct.
Is it possible, I mean, without intruding, but is it possible to get better information so we can kind of see? Because, I mean, I'm a pay for use. I mean, if we're using more of it than anybody else, we probably ought to be paying more of it than anybody else. Not necessarily size of our population, but percentage of usage.
Right. I have talked with my staff about the importance of trying to get that information if we can. Our federal grants are very, very specific, and they are very serious about zero barriers to accessing services. And so we're a little bit hamstrung on that, but I hear you, and I want better data myself. And so I'm like, don't coerce people, don't badger them, but really try to get this information. It really will be helpful.
Is it usually law enforcement that's bringing the people
I was
to
just
you?
gonna say.
No,
I was going
certainly.
to say that makes it easier because you know who's.
Right. What we do know, though, also is that people are really transient. They might, I mean, especially with the housing crisis and lack of affordable housing, people are moving all the time. Or they might live in Weber County and go to a bar in Davis County and experience an assault and come back to Weber County for services. I mean, their last known address is not necessarily where the perpetrations or the abuse happen all the time. So
I mean, without being prying too much, I mean,
Yeah.
percentage population probably is your next best option.
Yeah. I think so. And I think the one thing too that we have heard, not from this group, but on occasion we hear, well, we don't have anybody who's using your services, so we're not gonna support your services. I'm like, well, we just responded last week to your community.
Well, some of that may
so-
have come from a predecessor or two before you come in and did a presentation and couldn't give us any information. And when we asked, it was like very reluctant to even have a conversation. It's like, okay, if you're not going to talk to us, how are we just going to open up the checkbook and give you money?
Right,
Let's have a rational conversation here to
yeah.
see how the utilization is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you go back to your stats on your presentation? Back. It was like Roy, West Haven. It's like 280 something was what we were, right there. There we go. And this is pre the legislation, correct? This is 2022 numbers, or is this year to date?
This is 2023.
This is, okay. And so, all right.
So thankfully, Roy has been using the LAP
Yes.
for a long time.
And are these indicative of LAP numbers? Is that what is driving this
Not
number?
exclusively,
But
they would be within these numbers.
okay. So
The
that
other
goes back
thing
to
is
your
that
question.
these are only the people who've accessed services. So there are more than this. I mean,
correct.
there's a lot more happening than the people who've gotten a LAP or
Right.
gotten
So
referred.
these 289 people are what our police department brought to you.
They're a mixture. They're commingled.
It's a mix. People
Yeah.
come to us in many, many different ways.
So
They
they
will-
either came from our police department or they said they were from Roy.
Correct.
Yeah.
And they're also Roy residents in that 10,000.
Right.
Right.
And
And-
so you said
The
you're
undeclared. The undeclared.
Correct.
And again, if we were to statistically plot based upon, go back to your other numbers, we can probably, presumably, I mean, again, we'd have to figure out percentages, but
it
yes.
probably breaks out just like that.
Correct.
Only more.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So there's more that are consuming it that are potentially from Roy. They're just not, there's no obligation on your part because, again, there has to be that zero barrier for the services. So, again, you have to kind of like be respectful of people's privacy in terms
Yes.
of their scenario. But on the flip side, with the legislation, we do have a tracking mechanism if our officers are going through and putting in the reports.
Okay. Randy Holt, and you had a question? Go ahead.
Well, so the services that so if somebody, if the, Chief Gwynn brings somebody in, you said you provide their services and you have 61 beds there. How long, are they allowed to stay there? And do you, is that part of the funding is for, the shelter and the food and the counseling and then you give them only so long to try to get them another place to live, or like if their life is threatened? I bet you those statistics you had are probably they're so much higher because a lot of people don't even report the assaults. So
Yeah, absolutely. And many people don't want to go through the judicial process. They're like, I just want to get safe and I want to get out of it.
right,
I don't want to go to court. I don't want to see him again. I don't want, whatever. And we respect that. We're going to partner with them on their journey and support them in the best ways that we can. To answer your question, some people will deny services. Some people will stay in our crisis shelter for 2 or 3 months. But it is a crisis shelter and it is a 30-day shelter. And so that's about the 30 to 45 days is about the average. We generally have, like this week we have, well, today it varies every day, but we generally have about, I'm going to say like 26 or 7 women and probably 22 or 3 kids in shelter at all times.
How often are you at capacity?
It kind of ebbs and flows, and it also kind of depends on the configuration of the rooms and the families, because we try to keep singles and try to keep families with families and singles with singles. So at capacity could be like 58, and so we're often at capacity, honestly. We utilize hotels. We run 3, and in a month we'll run 4 housing programs. So it's a big issue for us is when people leave the crisis shelter, they don't have anywhere to go. And so there's a whole bunch of financial abuse that often happens. People's credit is destroyed. Their access to bank accounts is non-existent if they have that. they don't have their personal documents. There's a lot of work that has to happen to get people back on their feet. And so one of the issues that we've had is we've seen, a lot of people just going back to the abuser because frankly, it's just easier. It's like the devil versus the one you don't. And so we are opening a transitional housing project, apartment building, hopefully this summer. And it's 14 units, and it is for people who leave the crisis shelter, don't have anywhere to go, but they're a good candidate for becoming self-sufficient, and that's a 2-year. They can stay there for up to 2 years with case management, with support, with childcare, with job opportunities, with tuition for education if they want that. I've been making partners with or creating partnerships with different companies that are willing to do kind of internships and apprenticeships. So really working on helping people get self-sufficient by the end of that 2 years. But we didn't overbuild, I'm like, we have to be really responsible about what we can frankly manage and pay for every year. So we came to a 14-unit apartment building.
And how many people do you employ?
We have 68 staff.
And what's the percentage you think of women that come in there? Women and children, probably really the highest percentage is women.
We provide services for all genders, but percentage-wise, let me just go to numbers. I think we had 10 men in shelter last year, all of last year. The rest are all women or children.
So like if our police officers pick somebody up, bring them into you, do they have the forms with them, and then do they fill them out in the car with them? That's what you do.
So the interesting thing about the lap screening is when you look at the services that are being provided by the YCC, not all of those cases are lap screens, and not all of those cases are referrals from law enforcement. When it comes to the lap screening, those are only the victim is only given that interview in cases where there's an intimate relationship. So we don't even do the lap screening on all domestic violence cases. It is only administered when there's an intimate relationship between the offender and the victim. And then when that interview is conducted, if that victim decides to accept a warm handoff to the YCC, then the officer will make the phone call, maybe arrange transportation if necessary. The officer will try and encourage the victim based on the results of the lap screen. But again, coming to the barriers, we don't try and force them. We try to encourage. Typically what we're gonna do is we'll make a phone call and we'll be there while they're talking to an advocate, or they may want the phone call, but they don't want us to stick around, or we can't stick around because of call volume. And then we may or may not follow up later. But that's typically our involvement in the lap screening.
So all your officers just have to make that decision based on the conversation when they pick that victim up to fill out that lap form, and then they...
Correct. So the form is evidence-based. And so if they score a certain number, or if they answer a certain way on certain questions, then the officer is actually compelled to notify the victim of their potential risk. It is then up to the victim to determine whether or not they want to receive the services. If they want to receive the services or at least reach out to an advocate, then we will try and facilitate the warm handoff to the YCC.
Brian, do you have a question? Randy, you had some other questions? You have?
No, as I say, you answered what I was looking for.
Perfect. Sophie, any thoughts, questions? Okay.
Well, a quick question, yes, and not that it matters, but the federal funding, are you getting increased federal funding or just going to cities?
We're getting decreased federal funding.
Okay.
Pretty significantly, actually. It's the Victims of Crime Act is our primary funding that comes federally, and that has been it's been decreasing annually. It's a whole thing in Congress about the way that fund is funded. And they actually have legislation pending. It's literally called the VOCA fix, the Victims of Crime Act fix. and it just seems to not really be getting any traction. So 2 years ago, they cut us by 42%. And last year we had like 28%. We do 3-year contracts with them. And so this year we have the same amount that we had last year, but that was after a 42% cut and then a 28% cut. So it's dramatically decreased. Now, we did get an appropriation from the state last year, not this session, but last year's session. And it's really the first time that the state has committed dollars to domestic violence services. And so we have a whole funding formula that goes through the Department of Health and Human Services and Utah Office for Victims of Crime that funds all of the different organizations. You know, it's a massive grant that we have to write, even though it's appropriated for the sole source providers. We still have to write this massive application to get it. And then we have huge quarterly reports that we have to submit. But that helped offset that loss at the federal level slightly. It in no way came close to equaling the loss. So we're down there every year, just like,
I bet.
please, sir.
So the money that you want from Roy City, is that something you want in a lump sum, or do we have so long, make payments, or how does that work? So
I would be happy to have that in whatever mechanism works for you all. It runs the gamut. A couple of cities I invoice and they send the funds. Like I said, in Ogden we have a contract agreement, and that goes annually in a sum. We're happy to structure that however the council feels like they can manage that.
Council, any other questions? Margaret, thank you. Let me offer at least a couple of things. We're talking about establishing agreement. Do you happen to have a copy of a draft agreement? I think it'd be important that we make sure we see that. Could you send that to me or Matt, and then we'll get it looked at? And then what I need to do, this was really all about information. We wanted you to come in, share your thoughts, make sure we answer any questions. I think the council got a real good insight on that. But I wasn't expecting to make a decision tonight. But certainly it's an action item for us to get that to a decision one way or another. But looking at the agreement would be very helpful, okay, on that. And you've also given us the amount that you're targeting, so that'd be very helpful as well. Council, any other questions?
Yeah, really quick. Matt, when you do information and let us know a little bit more, can you tell us how much we paid in the last few years? And just kind of so we can see where we're at? Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. Okay.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time, and hopefully we can just create a better support network.
Right,
So
thank you.
Thank you very much.
I don't envy your job at all.
Yeah. And Margaret, if any way, I know information can be sensitive, but there's power in your presentation that I think it's important the city council actually see. We're certainly seeing it here. Could you, you have to determine exactly how much and what you can share, but any part of that presentation, if not all that presentation, would be very helpful as we now take this to the next step, which would be is make a decision.
Brittany has that presentation already, and I'm
Okay.
happy to
Then
share
I'll ask
that with you.
Brittany, if she'll go ahead and send that to the council so we can go through that.
Absolutely.
I'll piggyback what the mayor said. There's power in data, and I know there's sensitivity in your data, but as clean and as thorough as your data can be, really helps us make the decision. Maybe we'll look at it and say, hey, we're contributing more and not getting given enough money. I would really like to. That's always been my thing is try to get as close to the factual numbers as possible. But
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. We work with other grants where the mayor and I are involved in that we can't share data. And it's like, it would be very helpful if we could share this data, but we can't share it. So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
It just helps us, at the end of the day, the important thing is we got to take care of our people. And the city council's got to make tough choices about how money's spent. And the important part would be is your numbers are pointing to 289 Roy residents. That's a pretty good piece of our society. And so it's important that kind of data have clarity for us because that's where we need to make focus to. Good information. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Margaret.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, council, city manager and council report, Matt?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple items for tonight. Two reminders. Last city council meeting, we did talk about the Warriors over the Wasatch. If you have not gotten with us, please do on whether or not you're attending. And then also the Senior Center RFP. That date is coming up on July 19th that we need to respond. So that will be in an upcoming city council meeting. Also, with the holiday weekend, also comes the splash pad and the aquatic center are both opening this weekend. So hopefully it's warm for us. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Council, anything you'd like to share tonight? Please, Ann.
I'm on the mosquito abatement board, and at our last meeting, they said that now that the weather's getting warmer, them little mosquitoes are coming out. And I told them about the new basins that are going to be along the water retention ponds along 5600. And they said that they acted like they knew about it and they would make sure that they were sprayed because I already have heard people talking about it. But any time that you have mosquitoes in your area, that they said just to make sure you don't have any standing water anywhere in ponds or anywhere, because that's where they get their larvae and that's where they grow. And to try to even pet dishes or flower pots or pools or anything that you leave out, that's where the mosquitoes are going to go. But if you ever have a party or something coming up, you just give them a call and they will come and spray your area for you. So,
Okay, great information to know. Anything else, council? Okay, just the last couple of things before I ask Joe about adjournment. Hey, Friday, which is May 24th, the American Legion Post 139, and I think I sent some information to you, council, will be placing their crosses out at the cemetery. That's going to start at 5 o'clock. If you'd like to join us and go out there and basically do the placement of those crosses, please do. I think some of them I heard are leaving to head to California.
yeah. I don't know what time,
but
I
on
like
Monday-
I like to do that. I try to come every year, but
Well, if you have family that happen to be available, some of you, I think, are taking your family. But on Monday at 9:30 a.m., they're going to actually have the ceremony, Memorial Day ceremony at the cemetery. It'll be on Monday, the 27th at 9:30. So if you can join us in the morning, okay? And I think Brittany was going to try to get something out for the public so we can try to get the public engagement. Anything else, council?
I just wanted to let you know that Roy High boys soccer made it to the championship game, and they'll be playing on Thursday at Rio Tinto Stadium, 1 o'clock. So we're letting school out early so that we can have the whole student body go down. It's a white out, so if you come, wear something white. And we're going to play Wasatch, and they're getting pretty cocky, and their think that they've already beat us, so we're going to hopefully go down there and whoop their butts. So.
Okay.
I think some of us are aware about the passing of our neighbor city mayor, Howard Matson from Clearfield. Howard was a great guy. He was actually a mayor of 2 different cities in Utah throughout his life. He was the mayor of Colville and the mayor of Sunset. Did a great job. He'll be greatly missed. He was a member of our board of directors at North Davis Sewer, so we'll be placing a new member from Sunset. But that's a tough loss for the city because he acts as city manager. He's a full-time employee as well.
So what did he die of, and how old was he? I didn't know about
He
that.
was 73 years old, and I'm not 100% sure on the cause of death.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anything else? Okay, with that then, do I have a motion then to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn and
Okay, do I
head
have a
down to work session.
I'll second
Okay,
it.
and I heard Ann second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Okay, nobody opposed? Okay, we're going to adjourn